60 years ago, a Swedish engineer looked at a 10-ton dump truck with a pivot in the middle and thought, that'll work in the mud. They called it Gravel Charlie. Yesterday, there was a report that the company that built Gravel Charlie started rolling electric versions off a production line. 39 tons, battery-powered. Deliveries within weeks. Now that's one of 6 things that happened and reported on yesterday that would have each been a standalone headline in any prior decade. So let's talk about what it means when they all land on the same morning. First, the enterprise AI market just showed its hand. Ramp, the corporate expense platform, published spending data just yesterday, and the numbers are striking. Among Ramp's paying corporate customers, Anthropic now accounts for 30.6% of AI spending. OpenAI, 35.2%. Now that gap was much wider just a month ago. Anthropic gained 6.3 percentage points in March alone. And at this pace, Ramp projects Anthropic will overtake OpenAI within a month or two. And it's not evenly distributed either. Anthropic already leads in 3 different sectors: information, finance and insurance, and personal services, the sectors where trust matters the most. Meanwhile, at the HumanX conference in San Francisco, the qualitative picture matched the quantitative one. Glean's CEO said that if you asked any business leader to pick one AI capability, the answer is Claude. Synthesia's CEO attributed it to discipline. Anthropic didn't chase video, didn't chase voice, just went deep on code generation. And what's emerged is what people at the conference are calling Claude Mania. One executive described it as having become something of a religion. Now, I want to make sure this really lands because enterprise spending data sounds abstract. It is not. When a company decides which AI system to build into its workflows, deeply, structurally, the kind of integration you don't rip out, that decision sticks for years, and it shapes what every employee at that company can do. And the data says those decisions are consolidating around the company that absorbed a Pentagon supply chain risk designation, held its safety commitments when states pressured it to abandon them, and then gave its most capable model to direct competitors for cybersecurity defense. So the market isn't rewarding safety as a nice to have, it's rewarding safety as a signal of long-term reliability. And what changes is the incentive structure then for every AI company watching this happen. Cisco's president, Jeetu Patel, added a detail at HumanX that I think is really underappreciated. 85% of Cisco's 18,000-person engineering workforce now uses AI. But the way he described it wasn't about the productivity gains. He said, this is a quote, "You can't think of these as tools. You might have a Scrum team of 2 people and 6 agents, or 2 people and infinite agents." Close the quote there. When the president of a Fortune 500 company describes team composition in terms of humans plus agents, not humans using tools, this is far beyond adoption. This is restructuring. The company didn't just add a new feature, it changed what a team is. Now, the Century Report first tracked this commercial tilt back on March 2nd when Claude overtook ChatGPT to reach number 1 in the US App Store on the strength of its safety positioning. What yesterday's Ramp data confirms is that the same dynamic is playing out in enterprise budgets, not just consumer downloads. So the signal is consistent across both markets. Focus and trust are outperforming breadth and scale. All right, let's shift to another story here. The cybersecurity story that started with Project Glasswing back on April 8th now has a number attached to it, and it's a small number. Logan Graham, who leads offensive cybersecurity research at Anthropic, told NBC News yesterday that he expects models with Mythos-level vulnerability chaining capability to be broadly distributed within 6 to 12 months, including from Chinese labs. So the implication is clear. Even if Mythos itself were never made public, independent development would get there. 6 to 12 months. Now that estimate matches almost exactly what former Facebook and Yahoo security chief Alex Stamos said on April 8th. Roughly 6 months before open weight models catch up. That's what he said. So this is 2 independent assessments from inside and outside Anthropic converging on the same window. The cybersecurity community is treating this like what it is. GovTech published 7 urgent recommendations for CISOs yesterday, starting with recalibrate your operating model around hours and days, not weeks. The Cloud Security Alliance convened an emergency virtual session. An industry analyst called it a break glass moment. The word making the rounds is vulnapocalypse, vulnerability apocalypse. When security professionals start coining apocalypse portmanteaus, they're not being dramatic here. They're updating their threat models. What makes this different from every prior cybersecurity escalation is the specific capability. Graham described how Mythos doesn't just find a bug, it writes the script to jump from browser to the kernel to the cloud. It chains weaknesses together into sophisticated exploit paths. Former FBI senior cyber official Cynthia Kaser warned that people who lacked the skill a year ago now have some of the most powerful tools ever known to humankind right in their hands. The capability floor just rose for every attacker on Earth, and it's going to keep rising on a schedule measured in months. So the natural instinct is to sit in the fear for a second, and that fear is legitimate, but follow the trajectory through. The same capability that finds vulnerabilities at machine speed is also the capability that patches them at machine speed. Now, Project Glasswing exists because Anthropic recognized that the defensive infrastructure has to be built before the offensive capability proliferates. 40-plus organizations, including direct competitors of Anthropic's, are using Mythos right now to find and fix vulnerabilities across critical infrastructure. The 6-month clock isn't countdown to catastrophe. It's a construction deadline. What we should be framing this as is whether the defensive build-out reaches enough of the internet's attack surface before the offensive tools can reach everyone else. That's a race with a defined finish line, and for the first time, the defenders know exactly how much runway they actually have. And even beyond all this, every time a new technology comes out, we're given a million reasons why it's something that we should fear and why it's something that's going to end the world in extreme circumstances. And of course, this is a fundamentally different technology than everything that has come out before. And it does indeed broaden the attack surface because of how general AI is. At the same time, it also broadens the defense capability. AI by its very nature is general. It does not, as some headlines would have us believe, give all advantages to attackers and no advantages to defenders. It is broad, it is general, it is doing both. The reason I think this is being framed as a vulnapocalypse by those who are meant to do the defending is because they are setting themselves a deadline, and a serious one. Because, of course, if they let the infrastructure slip too much, then yeah, it might be bad. At the same time, think of it this way. We don't know for sure what it would be like if, and this is a big if, that were to actually happen and the defense industry were no longer to exist. That story, that panic story, it's built on a worldview that, yes, we've always had. This worldview that assumes there must be a clean line between defense and offense, like there's good guys protecting the fort and the bad guys are trying to break in. And that's really simplistic thinking. In practice, defense has almost never been purely defensive. Most of our strongest, quote, defense is just a form of controlled offense, preemptive moves, power displays, deterrence through capability. It's the snake eating its own tail, honestly. And the more we build to defend, the more we contribute to the cycle of fear and escalation. And that's where this idea of the inevitable vulnapocalypse kind of breaks down. We don't actually know what it looks like if that structure, defense as offense, finally collapses or changes. There's this assumption that without strong walls, everything burns. But reality is far more complex than that. If, hypothetically, our defensive toolkit weakens, it doesn't mean society suddenly plunges into chaos. Humans are messy, adaptive, and communal, and AI is the perfect counterpoint to all of that. We're very much yin and yang here. There's strength in numbers, first of all, and there's strength in networks. Most people want stability and not destruction, so the idea that bad actors would suddenly run the world doesn't match how human systems actually behave. Now, maybe what's coming then isn't an apocalypse per se. Maybe it's the uncomfortable realization that our old idea of defense, the one built on fear and escalation, is not the only way forward. Just something to keep in mind. All right, let's shift away. 3 infrastructure stories landed yesterday that I want to take in sequence because the pattern only becomes visible when you see them all together. First, India's Prototype Fast Breeder Reactor at Kalpakkam achieved criticality. Now, that is the engineering milestone where a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction begins. Now, this reactor is designed to produce more fissile material than it consumes, which means India can leverage its substantial thorium reserves instead of depending on imported uranium. So from 8 gigawatts of installed nuclear capability today to a target of 100 gigawatts by 2047. And this is happening while the Iran conflict continues to disrupt global supply chains, making energy self-reliance not just strategic, but clearly urgent. India's has been distinctive and worth naming. They're building compute infrastructure, such as the G42 Cerebrus 8 exaflops deal, semiconductor assembly through HSL and Foxconn, open source language models through Sarvam, upstream solar manufacturing through Wari's 10 gigawatt facility, and now advancing their nuclear fuel cycle, all simultaneously, not waiting for one piece to finish before starting the next. A 1.4 billion person nation constructing the complete physical and digital infrastructure of the next era in parallel. In fiscal year 2026 alone, India added 44.6 gigawatts of solar, bringing total wind, water, and solar capacity to 257.8 gigawatts. Second, Japan approved an additional $4 billion in subsidies for Rapidus, which is its domestic AI chip startup. Total government investment is now $16.3 billion, targeting 2 nanometer chip productions by late 2027. Now, Japan already holds roughly 70% of global industrial robotics manufacturing. Adding leading-edge semiconductor fabrication to that base means a nation facing a projected 15 million person shrinkage in its working-age population, like we talked about the other day, is betting that the machines it builds will do the work its people can't. Third, there's Volvo, so those electric haul trucks that I mentioned at the top of this podcast. The A30 carries 29 tons, and the A40 carries 39 tons. They charge via standard CCS connectors at up to 200 kilowatts, which is fast enough to go from 10 to 80% between operator shift changes. And that detail matters enormously because it means that they don't need expensive megawatt-scale charging infrastructure. Plug into the same kind of charger that you would find at a highway rest stop, scaled up. Full shift operation, recharge during crew rotation, deliveries to UK and Norwegian customers within weeks. Now, when a 39-ton haul truck runs on batteries and recharges during lunch, the economics of diesel in mining and construction start eroding from the top of the payload range, where fuel costs are the highest. Now combine that with Australia recording its highest ever monthly share of plug-in vehicle sales in March, nearly 23% of all new cars sold, up 90% year over year. Back on April 5th, the Century report documented Australian EV dealership lots emptying within days as fuel crossed $3 Australian per liter. The electrification of transportation is now advancing simultaneously at every scale, from compact passenger cars in Sydney to 39-ton haul trucks in a Norwegian quarry. And at every scale, that cost advantage is compounding. This isn't a transition waiting for a tipping point. It's a transition that's already tipped and is now rolling downhill. Okay, let's shift to another story here. In 1958, a Columbia University chemist named Ronald Breslow proposed something that other chemists thought was probably impossible. He hypothesized that vitamin B1, thiamine, could transform into a carbene to drive essential biochemical reactions. Now, a carbene is a form of carbon with only 6 electrons in its outer shell instead of the usual stable 8. Wildly reactive. Now, it made sense on paper, but actually observing it in water, where everything reactive gets destroyed, nobody could make that work for 67 years. Yesterday, UC Riverside chemists reported they'd done it. They stabilized a carbene in liquid water, not for seconds, for months. The lead researcher, Vincent Lavallo, described the protective molecular structure that they had engineered as a suit of armor, shielding the reactive center from everything around it. They confirmed it with nuclear magnetic resonance and X-ray crystallography. Breslow's hypothesis validated, and the practical payoff goes straight to your medicine cabinet. Carbenes are widely used as supportive components in the metal catalysts that drive reactions for producing drugs, fuels, and materials. And right now, those reactions happen in toxic organic solvents. You might remember this from the other day that we covered this. Stabilizing carbenes in water means that you could potentially run the same chemistry in the most abundant, least toxic solvent on Earth. First author, Varun Raviprolu, put it simply: if we can get these powerful catalysts to work in water, that is a big step toward greener chemistry. And I think big step might be a little bit of an understatement there. This sits in a trajectory that the Century report has tracked through multiple findings. the KIST sunlight-powered catalyst back on March 31st, the Nagoya iron photocatalyst replacing rare metals on February 28th, Cambridge's light-powered reaction on March 14th. Each one compresses the distance between laboratory chemistry and sustainable manufacturing. The carbene stabilization adds something fundamental to that sequence, not just a cleaner way to run a specific reaction, but a demonstration that reactive chemistry itself can operate in water. The solvent changes, and when the solvent changes, the entire infrastructure around pharmaceutical production, the waste handling, the safety equipment, the environmental remediation, all of that simplifies. And this is one of those stories that has a really long arc, as I just mentioned all those dates a second ago, that Century Report has been tracking for a while. So this is a perfect opportunity to let you know that you can track all of this on my website. If you go to sharedsapiens.com, in the menu at the very top, there is a progress tracker link. If you click on that, you can see every story that we cover here on the Century Report, and you can see all the stories and how they track with each other, and you can track this with me. So definitely check that out. Then there's the finding about Alzheimer's that refrains something that doctors have observed for decades without fully understanding why. Loss of smell is one of the earliest signs of Alzheimer's disease. Clinicians have known this, but why it happens, the specific mechanism, still remained unclear. Now, researchers at DZNE and LMU München published findings yesterday in Nature Communications that identify exactly what's going on. The brain's immune cells, microglia, are actively destroying nerve fibers that connect the olfactory bulb to a region called the locus coeruleus. And they're doing it because those nerve fibers are flying a specific molecular flag. A fatty molecule called phosphatidylserine, which normally stays tucked inside the neuron membrane, shifts to the outer surface. That shift creates what the researchers call an eat me signal. The microglia see it and dismantle the connection. Your immune system is literally eating the wiring for your sense of smell, years before you forget a name or lose a word. The researchers confirmed this across 3 independent evidence types: Alzheimer's model mice, brain tissue from deceased patients, and PET scans of living people with Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment. That convergence across animal models, post-mortem tissue, and living human imaging is what gives this finding real weight. For you personally, and especially if Alzheimer's runs in your family, pay attention to what this enables. We now have a specific measurable molecular signal that appears years before the cognitive decline. Add this to the plasma p-tau 217 blood test from February 23rd, the Scripps protein folding blood test from March 12th, the USC blood flow marker from February 25th. Each one identifies a different biological signal of the early disease, and each one expands the detection window, the years before symptoms, when treatments like lecanemab are the most effective. When multiple independent detection methods all point at the same early window, what changes is the entire treatment paradigm. You stop managing decline, you start preventing it. And for a disease affecting more than 50 million people worldwide, that shift from reactive to preventative is one of the most consequential in medicine. All right, let's talk about what shipped yesterday. Minimax released M2.7, an open-weight 230 billion parameter model with only 10 billion active at any time, and a 200,000 token context window, and it's built specifically for agentic workflows, including coding and research. It's available over on Hugging Face. Anthropic also shipped Claude for Word in beta. This is a native Microsoft Word integration, bringing Claude directly into document workflows. And they also launched Claude Code Ultraplan for cloud-based code-based planning and architecture analysis. Okay, everything I've described landed in the reporting in one 24-hour period. The enterprise market putting its money behind embedded values, a 6-month construction deadline for cyber defense, a nation of 1.4 billion people building nuclear, solar, compute, chips all at once, the heaviest machines on Earth going electric at production scale, a hypothesis from 1958 confirmed in a way that could move pharmaceutical manufacturing toward water, non-toxic water, and the brain's immune system caught in the act of dismantling smell circuits a decade before Alzheimer's symptoms appear. Reactors that achieved criticality, trucks already rolling off production lines, molecules already stable for months, spending patterns already shifting. The transition doesn't really announce itself. It just accumulates until one morning you look at the day's findings and you realize this is what the future looks like when it stops being theoretical and starts being Tuesday. Now, very soon, watch for whether Anthropic actually overtakes OpenAI in Ramp's data within that 2-month window, because if the enterprise market formally crowns the safety-first company as the spending leader, every AI lab's strategic calculus changes. Watch for the first Glasswing Coalition vulnerability disclosure, and keep watching India, because the country building everything simultaneously is either the template for the transition or the exception that proves how hard it is. Either way, that's the story. We'll see you tomorrow.